for the gardener in all of us. The RHS Chelsea Flower Show 2005. Weeknights at 8 on BBC Two.
Within the last few minutes...
Police have tonight warned Robert McCartney's family of threats from criminal elements. A further 19 products have been confirmed to contain spices contaminated with para red. The US sports tycoon Malcolm Glazer has launched a takeover bid for Manchester United.
More than 60 people have been killed and many others injured in a series of bomb attacks across Iraq.
Whenever it happens here. BBC News 24.
Just 30 minutes ago, the polling stations closed and voting in the general election ended. In the course of the next 6 or 7 hours and in the 13 or 14 hours after that, we're going to try to give you not only the story of the development of everything that's happened since voting finished and the course of the election and its results, but individual results just as fast as they come in to us. Now, for that purpose, television is out in force tonight. Not only here in London, in the studio from which I'm talking now, but, as you can see if you look, all over Britain. You see behind me here this map. It has on it lights to show places to which we are going. London, up in the north, the Midlands, the west. This is our map and our indicator. At the sides there on the left, you'll see names of some of the places that we hope with television during this night and tomorrow to visit. Glasgow, Lanark, Bristol, Cardiff, Cross Hens in Wales, Salford, Manchester. And on the other side, the same thing again, Edinburgh, Leeds and Birmingham, Watford, Wembley, party headquarters. In fact, we're going out and about just as much as we can. Now, that's just part of the story. There is also in London a pretty hefty organisation which is poised now, ready to start. It has to be big because this is the sort of job that demands a great many backroom boys and girls. You might like to look at the big studio next door, which is full to the brim with backroom boys and girls. Very soon they'll be working hard because this is the place where the results actually come in. And from here, where they're filtered and sifted and prepared on special cards for us to show them to you, they come into this studio. And then in this studio, we have the job of presenting them to you and of keeping the wheels turning for a good many hours to come. Now, sitting with me here, he will be my constant companion tonight and tomorrow, is David Butler. David Butler is a man who's made a great study of general elections, has written an authoritative work on the 1951 general election, and is a don at Oxford. He best, I think, can introduce himself to you this evening.
Well, it's my job tonight to try and make the sense of the results for you, to do lightning calculations on the basis of the individual results as they come in, so that as soon as they're on the screen, if possible, we shall be able to tell you whether there's something significant about the change in the results since last time. But of course, I'm not really a lightning calculator myself. I can only do this with the aid of the people on my right, with Robin Farquharson here, and with this team of statisticians, all of them from Nuffield College, Oxford, where I teach, and they're all research students there, and they'll be with their slide rules doing their best to get the results sensibly to you as fast as possible.
And then further over on the left is sitting E.R. Thompson, whom we know as Teddy Thompson. I shall probably slip into calling him Teddy during the night. Teddy Thompson, who is the BBC's own parliamentary correspondent. He can tell you how he himself is very much concerned with what goes on inside the House of Commons.
Well, you've just seen the experts will soon be working at very high speed on the results of the voting. And I suppose the burning question for all of us now, and for some hours to come, will be who's winning the election. But of course, as the results come up on the screen, we shall also be witnessing the build-up of a new House of Commons. Well, it's my job to observe the House of Commons at close quarters from the gallery and the lobby. And I'm going to try to give you as much as I can of the parliamentary background, parties and personalities, as we go along.
Well, now those for the moment are our experts here. Now we've got, we think, in the region of half an hour or possibly 35 minutes before the first result comes in. There are 4 or 5 places who vie with each other to some degree to be first. We have outside broadcast units stationed at those towns. We hope thus to be able to take you right into the counting halls and, if we're lucky, to be right on the spot as the very first announcement is made of a result just as soon as they know that they've counted it correctly. Meanwhile, we think we might go outside now, away from the studio, and find out what people outside are thinking about prospects and the immediate future. And we thought we would start by going to party headquarters. First of all, to meet Lord Woolton, who is, of course, the chairman of the Conservative Party. Now, he is going to be interviewed by another of our experts on political affairs, by Robert Mackenzie. So, to meet them, let us go now to Abbey House.
Here in the Conservative Party's own television studio is Lord Woolton, the chairman of the party organisation. Now, Lord Woolton, you again and again during the campaign warned your people of the dangers of apathy. Have you been discovering evidence of apathy in today's voting?
Dear me, not today. Most certainly not today. I've been round 10 constituencies in the London area today. I found the whole place bubbling with excitement, just like this central office is now, tonight. And I thought there was a little danger at one time when we heard all these Gallup polls that people might be taking it for granted. I think that apathy has all gone. And they've turned out today to vote. And by the way, I wonder whether you'd let me just do this, Mr. Mackenzie. We've had so many people who worked so hard for this election all throughout the country. Just let me take the opportunity of expressing my profound gratitude to them for all the work that they have done.
I suppose your main job here at party headquarters has been pouring out literature and sending out speakers and so on?
Well, we let me see, what have we done? We've sent over 4 million leaflets out. They've all had to be counted one by one. We've arranged from here over 610 meetings, apart from the meetings that have been organised by the constituencies themselves. Not much apathy about that, was there?
Well, now tell me...
And they've been good meetings too, let me tell you.
This was going to be a television election, some people said, and that meetings would be of less importance. Do you think the decisive words were spoken on television?
Ah, very important words were spoken on television. But I do not believe that television decides election results. And, Mr. Mackenzie, you're the author of a book and you know a great deal about this problem. I hope it won't, because surely the really important thing is the personal contact between the candidate and the electors. I think so far from the elector being the election being decided by television, it's being decided on the doorstep.
Well, there's one question I've got to ask you, Lord Woolton. Who do you think is going to win?
There was a very famous statesman who once said, wait and see. Wait and see, Mr. Mackenzie.
But now, how do you feel in your bones?
Oh, my bones are all right. Not a trace of rheumatism in them, not a trace.
And how are you going to spend election night?
Well, I'm going to stay here until 3 o'clock tomorrow morning, full of hope.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Lord Woolton.
I'm very much obliged to you, too.
I've been interviewing Lord Woolton from the Conservative Party headquarters. Back now to Richard Dimbleby in the studio.
And Robert Mackenzie himself will be back very soon with us here in the studio to add the weight of his opinion as one of our political experts. Now, for another point of view, to the Secretary of the Labour Party, Mr. Morgan Phillips. Now, he is at the Labour Party headquarters, and so we go now straight away to William Clark at Transport House.
Well, here we are in Transport House, and actually in this rather fine pillared room, which is the council chamber of the Trades Union Congress, where the trades union representatives meet and have their debates and make their decisions. But tonight I brought from upstairs the General Secretary of the Labour Party, Mr. Morgan Phillips. Mr. Phillips, do you think you've managed to get out the poll today with a fairly fine day to help you?
Yes, I think we've got out the poll, but it hasn't been fine throughout the country. I've heard that it's been raining in Cheshire, it's been raining in some parts of the southwest region, But in spite of that, our reports are that the poll is very high. If it was maintained in the last hour, it may well be that our total poll will be greater than the last two general elections.
You don't think that there's anything much to the apathy that we've been hearing about?
No, I've never accepted the view that there was apathy. You see, some of the former election campaigns have been clouded, I think, by newspaper headlines and stunts, but I do recall the 1945 general election, which was equally quiet in many senses apart from newspaper headlines. And I felt that the people were thinking thoughtfully about the issues before them.
What do you think were the real issues before them now that the polls have closed and we can talk frankly?
Well, I think the issues that have been mainly discussed are the issues of the cost of living, of pensions and benefits. I believe fair shares as against a free-for-all, national service, the shadow of war in the H-bomb era. And then, of course, we've had the usual scares. We've had the attempt by some people to make Mr. Bevan a bogeyman. And then we've had the attempt to create the rationing scare. I felt very sorry for Lord Woolton, you know, because it seems his own people, in order to try and get a scare against us, robbed him of the credit of his achievements as Minister of Food during the war when he introduced rationing, indeed with our support. And now, when we started de-rationing, they seem to give us the responsibility and authority for being the rationing party. I think Lord Woolton is entitled to the credit.
Well, now, just one last thing, though. Do you have any sort of prediction this early in the evening?
Well, we naturally make our own calculations, but the main thing, as far as we're concerned at the moment, is to see that we get more than 14 million votes. If we get that, we shall be happy. If we lose in a high poll, we shall accept the decision of the electorate and act as a vigorous and constructive opposition. I'm hopeful, however, that the high poll may well mean that we shall be called upon to form the government and carry out the pledges we made during the election.
Well, that's all the time for now. Thank you very much. And now I'm afraid we're going to have to leave here, but we'll be back into Transport House in the course of the evening. And now back to Richard Dimbleby in the studio.
And now, for our next call outside on party matters, to the Liberals. Mr. Harris, who is the General Director of the Liberal Party, will be talking to Brian Connell. So, we go now over to him at Bush House.
Mr. Harris, perhaps you'd care to tell us what reports you've been getting from your agents in the 110 constituencies where Liberal candidates are standing.
Well, we've been having the most encouraging reports. Of course, like everybody else, we've had reports of an extremely heavy poll. We think that is to our advantage in those areas where we have a Liberal candidate, because it means that Liberals are going to the poll. But perhaps the most interesting thing that's been happening during the course of the day at our headquarters are the dozens, the hundreds of people who've been ringing us up to say, we haven't got a Liberal candidate, we're only too sorry about that, how do you advise us to vote? And we've given them that advice, but I don't propose to tell you what advice we have given them.
Perhaps you care to tell me what constituencies you are in fact principally interested in?
Well, of course, we're interested in all constituencies because we do feel that at this election we have an opportunity of increasing the total Liberal poll. And therefore, we're interested in all results where Liberal candidates are standing. But we're particularly interested in those where we think we may make Liberal gains, such as Anglesey and Merioneth, Roxburgh-Selkirk, Inverness, North Cornwall and North Dorset. We're interested in a second group where we feel with some confidence we shall increase our vote, in Totnes and in North Devon. And then there's a group of constituencies for which I have a peculiar affection, those where our young Liberals are standing. Richard Moore in Tavistock. He takes his final examination 3 days after polling day. Barbara Burwell in Bath, Roy Douglas in Bethnal Green, and Derek Murphy in Oldbury and Halesowen. And I shall watch with a great deal of pride and interest the results in those constituencies.
We've been hearing and seeing a lot of reports in the newspapers about relatively sparse attendances at the constituency meetings. Has that been your experience?
Not at all. If I could think that half the people who've been to Liberal meetings voted Liberal, I should be very confident indeed. We've got the most extraordinary reports of the most extraordinary meetings. We gather that last night, the eve of poll in Hereford, Mr. Frank Owen had a meeting indoors of over 900 and came out to a meeting of 1,000. Jeremy Thorpe, one of our young people in North Devon, had a meeting inside of 1,000 with a relay to people outside. Edwin Mallandine had a meeting of 1,500, and it's been our experience the whole of the campaign that people have come to our meetings. We've had very good meetings, very large meetings, and they've asked the most interesting questions, which I think we've been able to answer.
Well, that is all most encouraging, and we shall wait to see the result. And with those comments from Mr. H.F.P. Harris, the General Director of the Liberal Party, it is back to Richard Dimbleby in the studio.
Now, as I said, all over the country votes are now being counted. And as I said too, we have units waiting at the 5 very strategic points to bring us instantly the news the moment that a count is complete and the result is known. But we can now, without waiting for that, go out into the provinces to get some news of what is going on in those counting rooms. Let's go, first of all, west to Exeter. Over to Frank Gillard in Exeter.
Here at Exeter on this very wet evening, crowds are already gathering outside the Civic Hall for the declaration of the poll. And while the general public brave the rain and remain outside, we have the privilege, by special permission of the returning officer, to go right into the hall where the counting is going on. All of us here, by the way, have been sworn to secrecy before justices of the peace, and you'll understand that we can't show close-ups of ballot papers. Well, here is the scene, as the votes of Exeter's 54,000 electors are counted by 60 official counters at 30 tables. The first ballot box was brought in at 9:10. The first job was to count the total of the votes cast, and now they're being sorted according to the voting. And there's a sound here, sound of the rustling paper like the falling of steady rain. Well, on each ballot paper there are 2 names. Les Merrion, the Labour candidate, and Dudley Williams, the Conservative candidate. I hope we'll get a glimpse of the 2 candidates in a moment. At the last general election, Mr. Williams, the Conservative, held Exeter for the Conservatives in a 3-cornered contest by a majority of upwards of 4,000. Well, you see, there are 4 people at each table. 2 of them are official counters. The other 2, you can see one there with a favour in his buttonhole, the other 2 are party nominees, and they check the counting. And the sorted votes, as they sort them, they're made up into bundles of 50, and when enough of them are bundled up, they're taken to the top table. So far, we haven't reached that stage. And the final totals are added up on a comptometer. And then at the head of this long hall sits the returning officer, Mr. Newman, the town clerk of Exeter. He's there in the centre there. He's in command of the whole operation, and he has the 2 candidates there with him. And they're looking, I think Mr. Newman is probably looking at doubtful votes. I know that's the principal job that he's got tonight, to decide whether a vote can be allowed or not. Well, now, that's the scene here inside the hall. Exeter hopes to declare early. Mr. Newman tries to be the first in the country, but you never can tell in this game. And we think that perhaps our hottest rivals in this friendly rivalry, to be first out with the result, may be the constituency of Salford West. So over now, from Exeter to Kenneth Wolstenholme at Salford.
And here at Salford is the balcony from which we expect the first result will be announced. And the crowd, which is just beginning to gather below, complete with banners, favours, rattles and bells, and all the paraphernalia of election day, is convinced that we haven't long to wait. They've already counted the total poll here, and so now they're sorting the votes into the candidates' polls. Well, the spectators are filling in the time, singing their party songs and shouting their party slogans, and the atmosphere is obviously electric. But inside, all is calm, with the pictures looking rather disapprovingly at the transformation of the Salford City Art Gallery into a counting chamber. And now we see some of the 200 counters who are counting the votes in Salford West, my own vote among them, by the way, while in an adjoining room another 200 are checking the Salford East votes. Both these constituencies are industrial ones, engineering and textile works, and of course the so-called Manchester docks are in Salford. In 1951, Labour won both seats by 6,778 in East and 3,487 in West. But in the recent municipal elections, the Conservatives gained 4 of the 16 seats, and so now have 12 out of the 64 councillors. Well, to get the 200 ballot boxes into the art gallery has been a work of superb organisation. 14 double-decker buses and 27 cars brought the counting clerks with their boxes from the polling booths, but because of building, which is in progress to the right of the gallery, the transport couldn't come right up to the door. So the clerks had to do a 100-yard sprint with their precious boxes. All the same, the first box was here at 3 minutes past 9, and everyone is still convinced that the 2 Salford MPs will, as usual, be the first to be elected. So, until we come back here for the declaration, let's go and see what's happening somewhere else. So let's go south to Bernard Slidell at Watford.
And here we are at the heart of Hertfordshire, so to speak, 17 miles northwest of London, in the town hall at Watford, a building created in 1940, where probably on most nights people would be dancing or watching a symphony concert. We're now at 14 tables, ringing the room, or ringing the hall rather. You can see the backs of the counting assistants who are counting the votes which are coming in from 49 polling stations representing an electorate of 53,000 people. And on the other side, looking at them, or watching them carefully, are the counting agents who are employed by the political parties to oversee the counting. And now, towards the centre of the room, we can come in and see the mayor, who is standing up there, the taller of the 2 gentlemen, the mayor of Watford, Alderman E.C. Amy, who is a surveyor who works for the London County Council. And on his right is the town clerk, who is the returning officer, Mr. Gordon Hall. He's a Yorkshireman. He likes living down south. And away to the right, we can see the Conservative candidate. We're coming up to him there with his hand in his pocket. Conservative candidate who is Mr. Fred Ferry Jones. He's a businessman and an aviation expert. Over on the left here, as we go over, we'll come to the Labour candidate, who is Mr. Ernest Ashley Bramall. And there he is, just taking his handkerchief out. Mr. Bramall, who was a barrister, whose wife, unfortunately, is ill. We hope she's watching this broadcast. Outside the town hall, the crowds are beginning to gather, and they're looking up expectantly at the balcony. And above the balcony, above the main entrance, you can see in a moment perhaps the crest of the Watford borough with its inscription Audentior, which means more boldly. And now the people were certainly bold today. They went out in horse-drawn coaches to the polls in many cases, and I expect they're wondering what's going to happen, because last time it was a 3-cornered fight in this constituency. There was a Liberal candidate with 2,000 votes to his credit, although the Labour man got him with a majority of 508. This time, there's, of course, only the Labour and Conservative candidate. What will happen, we don't know, but we should be coming back a bit later. Now, for the meantime, we go over to James Pestridge at Cheltenham.
Well, here in Cheltenham, it's been a grey but mild day with a few spots of rain that haven't deterred the electorate of 51,500 from recording their votes in good number. Outside this Edwardian Town Hall in Imperial Square, small crowds already gathered, and 3/4 of an hour ago the first ballot boxes had arrived, and now the crowd's getting really warmed up indeed as they wait for the announcement of the result of this election. There are visitors here as well as residents to this garden spa on the edge of the Cotswolds. And I see that they're getting quite a lot of fun and games because the time is being passed from amusement by Hearty the clown, who's keeping them all in fits of laughter and a bit of singing, and there's 1 or 2 umbrellas up, but there's not very much rain coming down at the moment. Well, now, inside the town hall, there's a very different scene. As in all the other town halls, counting is going on, and at the tables here, the votes are now being sorted into the 2 candidates and being checked by the political agents on these long tables that look almost like table tennis tables. And up on the top of the hall, on the stage, we have the official onlookers, the friends and relations of the candidates and the party representatives and so on. And the votes themselves are being put on the 2 long tables we can see in front of the stage. That on the left is James Finnegan, the Labour candidate, and on the right is Major Hicks Beach, the Conservative candidate. And the votes are placed out there in piles of 100, and recorded by the recorders so that in due course they'll be able to total very quickly the number of votes that are being cast. At the centre table there's a returning officer, the Mayor, Lieutenant Colonel Biggs, who was just checking through with his acting returning officer, the Town Clerk, any spoiled papers or any doubtful papers at all. Well, it won't be long now. The ballot boxes have all been opened and checked, and in the meantime I think that we'll go over to Barclay Smith, who's with the Roving Eye in Wembley.
And here at the Wembley Town Hall, a hefty stone throw from the football stadium. 2 counts and announcements of results will be made tonight. Wembley North, as you see, and later Wembley South. Both of these constituencies are largely residential, but they've both got considerable mixed industries in the areas. The position at the moment at the Wembley North count is that the content of the ballot boxes, they're being checked for total. When they're done, the papers are jumbled up in a mixer, and then they're handed to the counting assistants who sit on the inside of the table, that is on the right of that table, because the tables are laid in a great U around the room. They're handed to the counting assistants. And as they're checked into bundles of 50 for any particular candidate, so they go across to that central table. It's all green baize. They call it the caterpillar here, and anyone present in the room can see, as the count is in progress, the state of any individual candidate. And at the far end, you would see the number 30,000, which is something that any of those candidates there would dearly love to have in an hour or two's time. They're the tall figure of the Conservative candidate, Mr. Bullis. He's been a Member of Parliament here since 1950, had a majority of about 8,000 last time. And to his right, in a very gay jumper, the new Liberal candidate to the right, if we could just go, the new Labour candidate, Mrs. Jane Phillips, a one-time secretary of Mr. Attlee. And again to the right, the shorter figure of the new Liberal candidate, Lady Abrahams. Well, that is the position at the moment here. It will be, we think, some time after 11 o'clock. The last time it was 11:22 when the result was finally announced. So for the moment, it's goodbye from the Wembley Town Hall and back to Richard Dimbleby in the studio.
Well, now we've had 1 or 2 journeys out. Time has come for a much longer one to cross the border. We're not expecting any particularly early results from Scotland, but that is no reason why we shouldn't go over and find out what's doing up there. So we'll go up to Glasgow to hear from Esmond Wright. Over now from London to Glasgow.
Good evening to you. There are 71 constituencies in Scotland, but we won't be able to show you the result of 4 of them, indeed even when this programme is over tomorrow evening. Because as you can see by looking at the map, it's very difficult to bring the ballot boxes from, let's say, Mull, all the way round the Mull of Kintyre to Dunoon, where they're counted, or even overland to Oban. And the same difficulty holds of the Western Isles, of indeed this vast constituency of Inverness-shire, the largest constituency in the British Isles, which includes Skye, and of course particularly of Orkney and Zetland, Orkney and Shetland, as you perhaps know it, Orkney and Zetland, the farthest most constituency in the country. But we will show on our main grid of 71 constituencies, 6-7, we hope, by tomorrow evening. Now, we've divided the country up into 5 smaller sections. The Highlands and North of Scotland grid with 18 constituencies, which we shall shade in as the evening and tomorrow unfolds. The borders from Galloway across, of course, to Berwick and East Lothian on the east coast. And then the 3 grids for the central belt. Glasgow with its 15 constituencies, and then Edinburgh with its 7 constituencies, and then outside the 2 cities, the other 27 constituencies in the central belt in Scotland. You'll notice that there are 49 constituencies out of the 71 in this central Midland plain, the Forth Clyde Valley. In other words, 2/3 of the people of Scotland live in that area. Indeed, 1/3 of them live within 10 miles of Sauchiehall Street, Glasgow. Now, I'd like to make just 2 brief comments on this general strategic situation in Scotland. The first is this, that you may have an impression of Scotland as, let's say, a country of Willie Gallagher and Jimmy Maxton. You may think of it as Red Clydeside. In actual fact, Scotland is the most stable part of the United Kingdom politically. You may remember in 1945, 12%, there was a swing of 12% in the country as a whole to Labour. But in Scotland it was only 7%, and in Glasgow it was only 2.5%. Now, if one accepts that stability on the one hand, one has also to accept the importance of the marginal seats on the other. There are a lot of marginal seats not only in Scotland as a whole, but particularly in Glasgow and a few in Edinburgh. And I would say, if you're keeping your eye on Reading, you might also keep it, let's say, on Rutherglen, or on Kelvingrove, or particularly, perhaps, on Scotstoun. Meanwhile, we shall be returning here to see the map tonight and tomorrow. Meanwhile, this is Esmond Wright in Glasgow. I'm putting you over now to Professor Brindley Thomas in Cardiff.
Well, here in Wales, out of a total of 36 constituencies, Labour held 27, Conservatives 6, and Liberals 3. By the way, it's been raining very hard here since 6 o'clock, and I'm sure that'll make some difference. Well, now, what are we going to be looking for? Well, there are first the 6 very marginal Labour seats. There's Anglesey and Meirionydd in the north, Brecon and Radnor in mid-Wales, and Pembroke and Swansea West in the south. The Conservatives are very marginal at Conway, and the Liberals at Carmarthen, where Sir Rhys Hopkins-Morris had a majority of only 467. Well, now, if there's a national swing, of course Wales will go as well, but there are 2 cross-currents here that you have to allow for. The Welsh Nationalist Party is fighting in 11 seats out of 36, and of course there's the influence of Lady Megan Lloyd-George. Lady Megan, in the last 2 years, has been campaigning vigorously for a Parliament for Wales and recently joined the Labour Party. Now, the Welsh nationalists are very strong in certain parts, and a small swing towards them might make a big difference in a 4-cornered seat. There are some observers who say that the influence of Lady Megan will be exactly cancelled out by the vigour of the Welsh nationalists. Well, now, the earliest results will fortunately give us a clue. Carnarvon is expected early. It's a 4-cornered fight, and we'll know something about the strength of the nationalists and the Liberals there. And then, of course, down in the south, Labour has its big battalions. There were 9 seats there last time, with a majority of over 20,000. And an Irene Bevan's result is expected fairly early, and we'll be able to compare the majorities now with those in 1951, and that will be a very interesting clue. Well, now, back to Richard Dimbleby in the studio.
Now, to some extent, those who are at our various regional points commenting, as the commentary you heard a moment ago, and those who are in the counting halls are very much involved in the hurly-burly of this election as it goes on. And so, indeed, are we at this nerve centre in London. It might be a good idea, we thought, to include in our roundup of what's going on a more detached view of everything that's happening. So we propose to take you to 2 men who are sitting in the comparative seclusion of a room in Oxford, looking at a television screen just as you are. Those 2 men are both historians, Alan Bullock and Herbert Nicholas. And we're going to meet them in Herbert Nicholas's room in New College, Oxford, a room that looks out on the lovely gardens of the college. So, over now to Oxford.
Good evening. Here we are, as Richard Dimbleby says, far away from the hurly-burly in Herbert Nicholas's rooms in New College, Oxford, and here is Herbert Nicholas, who's going to be sitting up with us, looking at the election results together. Well, Herbert, what do you think we've got to look for in the election results? What's the first thing we've got to keep an eye out for?
Well, Alan, although we're so far away from the hurly-burly, the first thing I want to know is, of course, who's going to win.
Yeah, naturally.
Yes. But the second thing, which has been touched on already in this programme, is how are we going to explain this so-called quiet election?
Well, come on, you're going to say.
Sir Winston called the 1950 election demure. He coined the phrase for it. He said this was the most demure election he'd ever known, and he's a pretty good judge of elections in his time.
Yes.
Now, what is this due to? Will the result give us any clue?
Well, I should have thought what we've got to look for is a number of people voting, and if there's a rather changed view, I thought, Lord Woolton and Mr. Morgan Phillips. Now, they were saying only a day or 2 ago this was danger of apathy. If, as they seem to suggest, it's been a heavy poll, then I think what we've got to say is, are we in fact getting elections which are no longer of the old type in which the vitality of the election was judged by the noise, But are we in fact getting elections which are quiet, but this quiet doesn't in any sense mean apathy?
It isn't only noise, though, is it? People have said that meetings have been much less. Attendance at meetings has been much smaller.
Well, if 4 million people have been watching television, presumably this is a big factor in the election.
Yes. This theory that they're sitting at home quietly making up their minds.
Well, a jolly good thing too. I don't see why an election should be judged by the number of issues and scares which it provides for journalists.
No. On the other hand, isn't it a good idea for the public to get out and about and exchange views and question candidates and...
But Herbert, you don't believe any more than I do that people make their minds up which way they're going to vote in a 3-week election campaign.
Quite true.
They make it up over a period of years.
Well, there are some people who make it up during an election campaign, and they may settle the fate.
They may settle the fate, but the vast mass of the people in the country have made their minds up which way they're going to vote before the election campaign takes place. Isn't that true?
Yes.
I remember being in Germany in September 1953 and looking everywhere with a television camera to find an example of an incident or excitement, and there were none at all. We couldn't find anything, and yet that was one of the highest polls.
Wasn't it? No. Well, of course, in 50, which was this first very quiet election, there was a poll of 84%. In 51, 82.5%.
Yes.
So perhaps this one will be in the 80s or even the high 80s.
Well, we'd better wait and see what the proportion is.
Yeah.
I think the second thing I'm interested in looking for is the size of the majority which the winners secure, because it seems to be obvious that if you get sufficiently large majority, you are in a much better position to conduct the government of the country. Too small a majority can indeed hamper and cramp the whole business of administration and the management of the House of Commons. Of course, there's another point about that, and that is I think the size of the majority may have a considerable effect upon the character and policy of the parties themselves. For instance, to give you an example, it's been said by many people, I don't see whether it's right or wrong, that if the Labour Party had a small majority, this would mean increased influence for its left wing. If the Conservative Party, it's been said, had a large majority, then it would mean that they might change the character of their policy. I don't say it's true.
I wonder if the two parties are alike in this. We've got a recollection of big Conservative majorities, and we've a recollection of small Labour majorities.
Well,
we shall have to see.
Well, now there, we must interrupt Oxford, I'm afraid, because our first result is through. We go now immediately from London to Cheltenham.
And here at Cheltenham, the counting has been completed, and they're now at the present moment just writing out the final score. I think in a moment the returning officer, the Mayor, Lieutenant Colonel Biggs, will get up to make his statement.
Mr. Returning Officer is about to ask the candidates whether they are satisfied with the way in which the count has been conducted. The figures are being brought up to him now. Are you satisfied, Major Hixby?
Yes, sir, I'm absolutely satisfied.
Yes, sir, I am absolutely satisfied.
Thank you.
And the results? Well, will you everybody keep quite quiet whilst the results are being announced? All the papers being completely given, because the Mayor, the Mayor Colonel Biggs, the returning officer, is about to announce the results. Would you like to get on
At
your
the present
feet?
moment, the ballot papers have been counted and the final figures being entered up for the returning officer to read. And already outside, the crowds are cheering. I think news may have leaked out of the result, and here is the Mayor.
I, returning officer for Cheltenham, hereby give notice that the total number of votes given for each candidate at this election was William Whitehead Hicks-Beach, 24,259, James Finnegan, 16,638, and that William Whitehead Hicks-Beach has been duly elected Member of Parliament for the Cheltenham constituency.
Well, news has got outside. And there's applause in here from supporters of both candidates. And now I think we must go back to Richard Dimbleby in the London studio.
Well, there was our first result, and Butler,
there was a swing to the Conservatives of just over 2%. If every constituency in the country behaves as Cheltenham has done, there will be a majority of about 115 for the Conservatives over Labour.
And now we take you from London straight to Salford.
At Salford, we're looking at Mr. Donald Moore, the Conservative candidate on the left, and Mr. Charles Royal, the Labour candidate on the right, just fishing his tie, because the result of Salford West is ready. There is the town clerk, Mr. R.R. Thornton, and there, right in the centre, Mr. Donald Moore, the Conservative candidate, led by the Mayor, Alderman Goulden. The procession will move out onto the balcony. It's Mr. Royal and Mr. Moore going out side by side. And there you see the illuminated boards on which the result will be announced. Moore is Conservative, Royal Labour.
1955. I, George Henry Goulden, being the returning officer for the Salford West constituency, hereby declare that the total number of votes given for each candidate at the election are as follows. Henry Donald Moore, 21,554. Charles Royal, 22,413. And that Charles Royal has been duly elected to serve as a Member of Parliament for the said constituency of Salford West.
And so that means that Mr. Charles Royal, whom you see waving to his supporters now, who won by 3,487 in 1951, is now once again the Member of Parliament for Salford West. And so, with the crowd outside the Salford Art Gallery cheering their new Member of Parliament for Salford West, Mr. Charles Royal, the Labour Party's candidate, I return you from Salford to the studio in London.
And here in the studio we have time now, I think, for some comment from you, Butler, on both those results.
Well, in Salford and Cheltenham alike, the turnover in votes from Labour to Conservative was almost exactly the same. 2.2 in Cheltenham, 2.4 in Salford. And on that basis, if the whole country behaves like that, a swing of between 2 and 2.5%, the Conservatives will have a lead over Labour at the end when all the results are in, if the whole country behaves like that, of about 120 seats clear over Labour. The other notable thing about these two results is that in both of them, the turnout was substantially down. 8% down, I think, in Salford, and 4% down in Cheltenham. It does seem that this quiet election has produced a lower poll. It's very interesting to see this as the evening goes on.
Now, I'm going to make a note of the figure that you've given, because I believe in holding experts to their predictions. 120, unless something unexpected happens.
If the rest of the country behaves as Salford does, in the past the country has behaved in an extraordinarily unified way. One part of the country has behaved just like another.
All right, well, if it does, we'll see what happens. I've got the figure down. And now I think we might move out of town again. Let's get some comment on the situation from the Midlands. We go now from London out to Cheltenham.
Mr. Mayor. Speak right at it and Mr. Mayor, ladies and gentlemen, this result in Cheltenham, which I'm glad to say is an early one, will undoubtedly give a lead to the country. You have shown in Cheltenham that you believe in going forward with the Conservative Party. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm glad to say you have decided to go forward with the Conservative Party and not back with the Socialists. Thank you very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen, for a very fair campaign. And all I can say is I hope very much that everyone of every party will come and discuss with me any problem they want, because now I represent all people of Cheltenham.
Here we are. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you all for the kind way in which you have received me in Cheltenham. And if you look at the voting, you will find we are just about 120 down on the last election. So, and with the calumny of lies and abuse against my character by the Conservative Party of Cheltenham, take it like a man, and their attacks on the great trade union movement of this country, we shall live to fight another day. I hope the candidate will not forget the old age pensioners when he is returned to Parliament this time. Cheltenham will be one for Labour next time. All the best.
Now we're back in the studio in London, and I think that in a moment or two we're going to have a result of our own here. While that's on its way through, Butler, have you any comment to make on the general situation so far, which you think is appropriate?
I think I've stuck my neck out far enough for the time being. When 4 or 5 results are in, I shan't be so worried about the extension of my neck, but for the moment I think perhaps I'd better hold my peace.
Right. Meanwhile, our first result. I think we'll just wait a moment until it comes up for you to study. Here it is, Billericay, Essex. Now this is a seat with a major redistribution. The boundaries have been very much changed. Bernard Brain was the retiring Conservative member, so that Mr. Boddy, the new member, wins the seat.
The turnout was slightly down from the turnout in the old Billericay division, and of course we may be hearing about Mr. Bernard Brain in a little while, because he's standing, I believe, for South East Essex, the adjacent constituency, which is part of the old carved-up constituency through redistribution.
Now, I think we have a moment, Bob Mackenzie, for you to give us some quick indication of the role which you will be playing. I may have to interrupt you for a result from the north of England if it comes through.
Well, Richard, I'm mainly concerned to look at the long-range trends tonight and the repercussions for the parties and for the next Parliament of those trends. Like David Butler, I have no doubt whatever on the 3 results we've had so far, that there is a distinct trend of the Conservatives, and a very considerable Conservative majority of at least 100 seems to be in the offing. Apart from that, I'm interested in the fate of certain individuals, the powerful, the rebellious, and the rest. And I may say now, there's quite a list of fairly rebellious characters in the old house who are in danger if this swing continues. A number of well-known names, including a number of famous people associated with Mr. Anaran Bevan, are clearly in danger since they hold their seats by very narrow majorities.
Teddy Thompson, this question of redistribution, we've talked about it once or twice already. Have you something to say?
Yes, there is a point I'd like to try and get in, but I see I can't.
I'm sorry. Yes. If you have it again in a moment.
Yes.
There is, in a moment, another result coming up. It is, in fact, a result we've had already. We give it to you now as a check. You heard yourselves the result from Cheltenham as it was given in Cheltenham before anybody else. Here are the figures, if you want to write them down or check them again. Now, I think if you've got them, good. Now, Teddy, continue.
Well, if I can get it in before the avalanche overtakes us, it is a practical point, this, that since the last election there has been a very extensive redistribution of parliamentary seats. The effect of it has been to bring the strength of the House of Commons, which is being elected now, up from 625 to 630. And it's left unaltered only 410 of the old constituencies. Now, the point there is that it's only in respect of those that we're able, when our scoreboards come up, to give gains and losses, because they're the only ones in respect of which you can establish a true comparison with last time. So just let's keep that in mind. Only 410 constituencies are concerned when we put up gains and losses.
Thank you. Now, Butler, this question of so early in the proceedings giving a figure, as you did, of probable results based on one or two constituencies, are early constituencies so important that you can gauge accurately from them?
Early constituencies aren't very different from later constituencies. In fact, the reason why one can make a pretty good guess early on in the proceedings about the final outcome is because we in Britain are, perhaps thank God, so unified a country that what happens in one part of the country seems to happen in another. Past election results have shown an extraordinarily even turnover in votes in one constituency and another right throughout the country. And so when I gave those rash predictions, not predictions, statements a moment ago, that if the country behaved like the rest of the country, if the rest of the country behaved like Cheltenham and Salford, I merely was saying that if that swing was applied to every other constituency in the country, making a little allowance for the redistribution of which Thompson spoke a moment ago, then this is the number of seats that would be affected. And so we shall see. When we've had 5 or 6 results, I think we really shall be fairly confident about the actual number of seats that are likely to be in the majority.
Is that what's called being a psephologist? I've heard that word used about you, and I gather it's rather a controversial word.
It's a somewhat indiscreet word which was coined by my mentor in the study of elections, Mr. R.B. McCallum, who said that we must have a word to describe the study of elections, and he invented this word psephology. When the Greeks, the ancient Greeks, voted in Athens, they dropped a pebble in the urn, and they called it a psephos. And so there is this word psephology, P-S-E-P-H-O-L-O-G-Y, like psychology with E-P instead of Y-C. That's where the word is. Here's another result.
Psephologist today, Salford, I think, is ready with another result. We go straight London to Salford.
And here we're ready with the result of Salford East. There is the mayor, once again going to do his duty, Alderman George Goulden, JP. And the candidates here are Mr. Frank Alorn, Labour, and Mr. John Whiteley, Conservative. And so far it's almost impossible to find one of the candidates in the... I can just see Mr. Whiteley trying to push his way through. Mr. Whiteley, the Conservative candidate. There is Mr. Whiteley. Unfortunately swamped by his supporters. There's Mr. Whiteley now, just the back of his head, being congratulated by one of his supporters as he goes out onto the balcony. And here, remember, Alone, Labour.
1955, I, George Henry Goulden, being the returning officer for the Salford East constituency, hereby declare that the total number of votes given for each candidate at the election are as follows. Frank Alorn, 20,381. John Whiteley, 18,623. And that Frank Alorn has been duly elected to serve as Member of Parliament for the Salford East constituency.
And so Mr. Frank Alorn has been elected for Salford East, a seat formerly held by Alderman Hardy for the Labour Party, but Alderman Hardy did not recontest because of ill health. And now here is Mr. Frank Alorn with his vote of thanks.
My spirit is high. We've won thanks to the magnificent sacrifice of the Labour Party members. And we are going to win the general election too. Let it be a victory for peace and socialism.
And so as Mr. Whiteley comes up to second the vote of thanks.
But I am quite satisfied as the Conservative candidate, having reduced the majority by 5,000 votes, that my party will at least be returned to Westminster with a complete vote of confidence from the country of at least 75 to 100 seats. And that alone to me is a complete satisfaction, and I consider that my result here is a moral victory for the Conservative Party. Thank you all very much.
And so, with the wild cheering of the crowd, as Mr. John Whiteley, a redoubtable fighter for the Conservative Party, a former councillor in East Salford, waves to the crowd, this wildly cheering crowd, and the news that Salford has returned 2 Labour MPs, we return you to Richard Dimbleby in the studio.
Has lost his deposit. I'm afraid, to make it clear, I was not making political comment, but merely I'm sorry for anybody who loses £150.
We're very neutral in this programme, and
Yes,
we'll do our
indeed.
best to keep it so.
Well, the answer to what happens to deposits is that the government and hence the people get them in the end. I think it's rather like police court fines, so I wouldn't be too sure about that. Have we further comment anywhere on the table about the situation so far before we go ahead with any more results? In fact, I don't think there's time, because here's a result right across us. Manchester, Moss Side. Well, now here is a very famous, distinguished woman conservative and former minister, Dame Florence Horsburgh. She was Minister of Education for 3 years and Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health, and she holds this seat, which she has occupied for some 5 years, with Dundee for 14 years before. There was a Conservative majority in 1951 of 10,878.
Manchester's well ahead of the rest of the country in getting in its results. We've now, from Blakely, Manchester and Moss Side, Manchester, had the results from the 2 unchanged constituencies in Manchester. And the swing in Blakely was about 4%, and the swing in Moss Side was 5.8%. It does suggest that Manchester is swinging much more sharply than the rest of Lancashire, and indeed than the rest of the country.
Thompson?
Well, I was just going to say that it might be worth noting we've got 2 women returned of the 21 who sat in the last Parliament. There was Mrs. Jaeger in London, and there's Dame Florence Horsburgh here, who was, of course, one of the best known of the Conservative ladies in the House.
And now we have party totals again, and here they are. Thompson.
Yes, well, as you see, the trend appears for the moment to have been reversed. We've got the Conservatives now in the lead, Labour, Conservative 15, Labour 12. I don't think really that they demand any further comment at this particular stage, except to say that is the lead that has now replaced the lead. And the last time we saw this table of Labour 8, Conservative 6.
Thank you. By the way, if I might ask a general question, this timing of results, I'm keeping an eye on the clock here as I have to. Is there any noticeable difference in the time at which we're getting our results now as compared with 3 or 4 or 5 years ago?
I think that we're beating 1950 easily. In 1950, actually, this programme went on the air at 11:45, and we didn't have any results until we'd been on the air for 10 minutes or quarter of an hour. Last year, in 51, they started a good deal earlier, and the first results came about 10:15.
Thank you. Now we can go to the West Country. There's some more information available from Bristol. So let's go now, London, over to Bristol.
In Southampton, the main source of interest has been the Test division. The Itchen division was pretty safe for Labour, as was shown by the removal of the sitting member from Test to the rather safer anchorage of Itchen. As expected, Labour held Itchen by a comfortable, indeed an increased majority. You will see from our chart that the score in Southampton is, we've just had a flash at the Sun News in London, so back to Richard Dimbleby in the studio.
Yes, the news is the result for Warwick and Leamington, and in a moment you will see that it is that the Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Sir Anthony Eden, holds the seat which he has occupied for 32 years. He had a majority in 1951 of 9,803. I don't need to give you a resume of his career, I know, but I'm sure the butler will have something to say about the majority.
Well, this was a very nice compliment paid to Sir Anthony by his constituency, and also, of course, by the returning officer there, who had the count on the night, so that the British public should know as soon as possible the fate of Sir Anthony Eden. And he has got in by the big swing to him, and well above the national average.
And now we return immediately to Bristol, whom we were forced to interrupt. So back again from London to Bristol.
To continue, The score in Southampton, as we will see from the chart, is now in 1955 1-all. It's easy enough, of course, looking back on the figures, to say that this change was bound to happen. There was a very big redistribution involving about 7,000 electors from Test to Itchen and another 7,000 from Itchen to Test. However, the result was just a little bit unpredictable because of the intervention of a Liberal candidate and also because of the growth of a rather large housing estate in the Test division. If we look at this chart, you'll see that the total Conservative vote now, in 1955, is nearly as big as the Labour vote, but not quite. If we look at the swing, we find that the swing in Southampton, for the two divisions put together, it doesn't make sense to take them separately because of redistribution, the swing is approximately 1.5%. So the net result in Southampton is that the first gain in the West Country, and indeed anywhere, has been recorded, and the score is 1-all. And now back to Richard Dimbleby in the studio.
Well, there's no further result in at this very moment. We might perhaps look at one of our boards for a moment. Butler is waving a small car, which means he's got something he can add to the situation.
Well, now, I was actually warning you that I believe that very shortly we shall be getting a result, and before we got ourselves involved in talking about another thing, we were going to be interrupted by the result which you are in a moment going to be talking about, Richard.
What he means is there's a sort of rustling among the human machinery behind us, which tells us that something is about to happen. So before we do, in fact, take a spell by looking at the latest total board, we will give you the result as soon as it arrives. In fact, I think it's just here now. Here it is. It's down north. This, of course, is a Northern Irish seat. The winner of it follows the retiring member, Mrs. Patricia Ford. It's Mr. Curry. He fought East Flint in 1950 and again in 1951. Another result which follows close behind, here's Rotherham. Now here, a very well-known Labour personality, Mr. Jack Jones, who sat for 5 years and 5 years for Bolton before and was Parliamentary Secretary to the Ministry of Supply for 3 years, he holds the seat. There was a Labour majority in 51 of 14,807. This, of course, is one of the heavy industrial towns of the West Riding.
It's the first result we've had from Yorkshire, and there was a swing to the Conservatives of 2.3.
Thompson?
Oh, well, just a word. Jack Jones is, of course, a notable figure in the House. He was a steel worker himself, and he's a very robust personality.
Ask you to let me announce the fact that we have another result coming up at once. Here it is, Manchester Openshaw. This is a new seat, and it is won by Mr. Williams, the Labour candidate, who sat before for Droylsden. That's a seat which disappeared under redistribution, by the way. So there's no actual comparative figure to give you in the way of majority. Mr. Williams, by the way, is a member of Parliament who sat before for Heston and Isleworth for 5 years. Now, here is another result. Butler, I'm sorry. Manchester Withington has followed right on the heels of the other Manchester. This is Sir Robert Carey, who was Parliamentary Private Secretary to Mr. Cruikshank, the Leader of the House. Sat for 14 years altogether. Another seat were of major redistribution.
Yes, there's not very much to be said about it. Turnout down, as in the rest of Manchester, by 7% in Clayton and 8% in Withington. I would just call attention, by the way, to that result we saw a moment or two back in Down. It is the most overwhelming result for the victorious candidate in a straight fight I've ever seen, with the victorious candidate getting no fewer than 97% of the vote, the defeated candidate getting only 3% of the vote and forfeiting his deposit.
And now there's news that there's a result to be declared at Watford, so we take you now from London straight over to Watford.
Well, in fact, there is no result at Watford yet, but the excitement here is getting absolutely to fever pitch, to use a cliche if you like. As you can see on that table, the centre table, where the bundles right back to Richard Dimbleby then.
Back to me for a moment to announce another result from Lincoln. Now here, I think Butler will explain immediately. There's something interesting about
Yes, this is the first result in which Labour has improved its position on 1951. The swing to the Labour Party in this election in Lincoln is 2.2%. Now, we haven't had any case of any movement to Labour in any constituency yet of the 30-odd that we've had. But here we do have a case of a swing to Labour, perhaps due to the personality. I don't know. I don't believe candidate's personality makes a great deal of difference, but perhaps due to the personality of Mr. Geoffrey de Freitas, a very well-liked ex-junior minister on the Labour side.
He was, of course, Under-Secretary of the Home Office and for Air. Another result comes in, this time from Liverpool Exchange. Well, here's a familiar seat and a familiar member, and everybody's now raising their hands. Mrs. Braddock, whom I may perhaps be allowed to call Mrs. Bessie Braddock, who has sat for 10 years here, a most vigorous campaigner, holds the seat against her opponents. This is another major redistribution, so I can't give a majority comparison. Any comment, please, on Mrs. Braddock?
Well, of course, Mrs. Braddock is one of the very colourful figures in the House, robust alike in physique and in her methods of controversy, and there was some dissension, I think, in the divisional Labour Party in Exchange before she was adopted.
There is another result in, to interrupt you, Derby South. Another well-known member too, a leading member of the Labour Party and a former Olympic runner, Mr. Philip Noel Baker. He holds the seat. He sat for 21 years altogether. And another result again, Liverpool Toxteth. A minor redistribution here in this constituency. The sitting member was Mr. John Bevans, Conservative, was Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Works. He holds the seat.
A swing of 2% to the Conservatives, the first Liverpool result that's comparable. But here's another Liverpool result coming up, I think, now.
Yes, from Liverpool, Scotland. A minor redistribution again. The sitting member, Mr. David Logan, is a veteran member of the Labour Party. He sat for 26 years.
He's the oldest member of the House of Commons, or he will be the oldest member of the next House of Commons, aged 83. It's interesting, only two members have represented Scotland since 1885. T.P. O'Connor represented it from 1885 to 1929. Mr. Logan took over, and Mr. Logan presumably will be there for another 4 years or so.
I see there's another result about to come. Here it is from Bath. Conservative majority in 1951 was 5,296.
A 2% swing to the Conservatives, and the Liberal candidate forfeits his deposit.
Bath, often called the Queen of the West, and from Bath to Southport. In Southport, there was a Conservative majority of 17,853 in 1951. So the majority is slightly less for Mr. Roger Fleetwood Hesketh.
But it's only less because the turnout is down very much. There's actually a swing in the share of the vote to the Conservatives of 2.5%.
Another result follows. Wickham Bucks. Here, the sitting member, Mr. John Hall, has sat for 3 years. This includes the manufacturing town of High Wycombe and the rural district round it, by the way.
And it's remarkable for being the biggest Conservative gain yet in votes. Now, fewer than 6% of the electorate seems to have moved from Labour to Conservative there, and the turnout hasn't dropped very much, only 4%. 82.5% of the people of Wycombe seem to have gone to the polls.
Yes, the Conservative majority in 51 was 1,753, so you can see the difference. That brings us to date, for the moment, on our spate of results, over which I hasten to say we have no control. They rush in on us as they come. Have I any comment, please, after this rush, from Mackenzie or Thompson on the situation as you see it? Mackenzie?
Well, just to recap, there's so far only been one seat in which there's been a swing to Labour. That was a small swing to Labour, Mr. de Freitas' seat. Otherwise, there's been a consistent swing to the Conservatives, ranging from a fraction of 1% up to 6% and more. It seems still, to me, to look consistently in the direction of a Conservative majority of at least 100 if the developments continue as they are so far.
The seat. He is the sitting member. He sat there for 2 years already. This is a residential suburb just north of Liverpool on the coast. And now, further north, urgent news, I think, from Glasgow. We take you now from our studio straight over to Glasgow.
Well, back again in Glasgow. Here is the third constituency to be announced this evening in the Royal Technical College, that is of Woodside. And to announce it is Sheriff Guild, who has the papers there just on the left of the two. The papers are just being brought to him. Here is Sheriff Guild.
I have now to declare the result of the election in Glasgow Woodside Division. For Mr. Grant, there voted 19,846. For Mr. McGinley, 15,543. The majority is 4,303. I have to declare Mr. Grant has been elected to the Woodside Division of the Glasgow, Woodside Division constituency in Glasgow.
And so the Unionist candidate, there he is, Mr. Grant, has been returned with a doubled majority in Woodside. And now back to Richard Dimbleby in London.
And where in London we have another Glasgow result. It's Glasgow to Glasgow. Here is Glasgow Hillhead, a major redistribution. The sitting member, Mr. Galbraith, who sat for 7 years, a Conservative whip, holds the seat after redistribution for the Conservatives.
A drop of 10% in the turnout.
Here is London Battersea North. A very well-known sitting member, Mr. Douglas Jay, holds the seat for Labour, Financial Secretary to the Treasury, Economic Secretary to the Treasury as well. There was a Labour majority in 51 of 16,077.
The Independent loses his deposit.
Here is Dewsbury. In Dewsbury, the sitting member, Mr. William Paling, has sat for 10 years. There's been here a major redistribution, a Liberal candidate this time too.
He's very unlucky, just loses his deposit by a hair's breadth.
Yes. And Stretford. In Stretford, the sitting member, Mr. Samuel Storey, who has sat in the House for nearly 20 years altogether, 5 years for Stretford, holds the seat for the Conservatives. That's Cotton Town.
Just under 3% for the Conservatives.
And Newcastle upon Tyne East, where the sitting member is Mr. Arthur Blenkinsop, who has been Parliamentary Secretary to 2 ministries, has sat for 10 years and holds the seat for Labour. Sir Alfred Bossum holds the seat for the Conservatives. He sat altogether for 24 years. Conservative majority in 1951 in Maidstone was 6,447. Any comments from the other side of the table there? No? Well, meanwhile, you needn't bother, because I just have news that Glasgow is ready to give us some more information. But I see that a result has come in meanwhile. So we'll just give the result first. Southend West. A major redistribution. Mr. Henry Channon, who sat in the House for 20 years altogether in the Southend area, has held the seat for the Conservatives.
Miss Heather Harvey, a leading Liberal figure, has saved her deposit, 15% of the vote.
And here is Bebbington. Here the sitting member, Mr. Henry Oakshott, has sat for 5 years, a junior whip, and he holds the seat for the Conservatives. The majority in 1951 that he had was 8,421.
That's the first result from the Wirral Peninsula, a swing of 1.25% to the Conservatives.
Now I think we might go from London briefly over to Glasgow to hear what's doing up there. To Glasgow.
Well, here in the Glasgow studio, we're very lucky to have got very quickly up from the counting rooms somebody whose face is, of course, very well known on television, but also equally well known in Kelvin Grove, because he's been there for 31 years, I think. Is that right?
There and thereabouts, yes. Yes, there and thereabouts.
You have been returned with an increased majority, I think.
Oh, yes, we've more than doubled the majority, and naturally, I couldn't be more pleased. First of all, because we've had a lot of very, very hard-fought contests in Kelvin Grove.
We must interrupt just briefly, Mr. Walter Elliott, there, for Sheffield Brightside, which has just come in. A major redistribution. The sitting member, Labour member, holds the seat for Labour. The Communist forfeits his deposit. And also, we have Birmingham Northfield, where, after major redistribution, Mr. Donald Chapman, the Labour candidate, holds the seat for Labour. I think in a moment we shall probably be returning to Scotland for the discussion there to be continued. Yes, we go back now to Glasgow. No, another result's come in meanwhile, I'm so sorry. From Northern Ireland, Belfast. Belfast East. Here the sitting member, the Ulster Unionist, Mr. Alan McKibben, who sat for 5 years, has held the seat for them. You'll see here a Sinn Féin candidate.
He loses his deposit.
There's another result too, before we return to Glasgow, from Rowley Regis and Tipton. This is a very famous sitting member, Mr. Arthur Henderson. Sat in the House for 23 years, and after minor redistribution, he holds this seat for Labour. He was Secretary of State for Air, Minister of State for Commonwealth Relations, and Under Secretary of the War Office, and for India and for Burma. So he returns to the House of Commons. Here comes Birkenhead. Labour majority in 1951 of 5,249, and Mr. Percy Collick, the sitting Labour member, holds the seat. He was joint parliamentary secretary to the Ministry of Agriculture in the previous Labour.
Swing for Conservatives of 1.5%.
At West Houghton in Lancashire, the sitting member, Mr. Tom Price, who sat for 4 years as a trade union official, holds the seat for Labour. In 51, there was a majority of 10,675. Mr. Dunnett, his opponent, is Market Gardner.
A swing to the Conservatives of virtually nothing.
That's a cotton district in South Lancashire.
Just over 0.1%.
Now I think we might return to the discussion that Mr. Walter Elliott was having, which we had to interrupt. Let us go back from London to Glasgow.
Well, there seem to be gremlins over the Great North Road this evening, but anyway, we hope you are with us now. And Right Honourable Walter Elliott, who's, of course, with me here, was talking about his increased majority.
Well, I was saying, first of all, that we were delighted with it because we've had so many hard-fought battles in Kelvin Grove, and I'm especially grateful to all the workers who put in so much effort and who, I think, are equally glad myself of the result. And if any of them are watching, I'd like to thank them for their share in it. But I think also because this shows that a great industrial community in Scotland has come down decisively on the side of the present government. And I think that is a very encouraging feature, because industrial Clydeside has been in the forefront of all the difficulties, both political and economic, of the past 50 years. And a verdict from Clydeside is worth something, and I do believe that this ought to be a great encouragement to all who believe in the forward-looking, progressive Tory movement of today.
And just one word about the women, Mrs. Walter Elliott. Have they done you well?
I think they've done splendidly.
Well, I hear the bell going. I'm terribly sorry. We must interrupt. We've got to go back to London for another announcement. Back to Richard Dimbleby in London.
William Clark is there to interview Lord Salisbury on our behalf. So let us go over to them now at Abbey House.
Thank you very much. Well, Lord Salisbury, this is, I think, our first appearance on television, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Well, I'm most grateful to you for coming in at this very short notice. And I'd like to ask you one particular question. Do you think that in the results, which you must be feeling fairly pleased with, that foreign policy has played a large part in the election campaign?
Yes, I think it has played a considerable part. There's, of course, first of all, the personality of Sir Anthony Eden himself, who was well known to, during the last year, to have performed great feats of valour in that particular field. And I think the British people know that he is the best man to entrust foreign policy to at the present time. He and, of course, Mr. Macmillan, who will work together. But the personality of the Prime Minister is immensely important. And we've, up to now, had Sir Winston Churchill, and you couldn't have anyone better, obviously, in the whole country than Sir Anthony Eden to succeed him.
What other issues do you think have been coming up during this campaign of real importance that have given this swing towards you?
I think there's a general view that during the 4 years, nearly 4 years that we've been in office, the situation's improved. The general run of the people know that though in some respects things are not so good, has been a comparatively small rise in the cost of living, yet that has been offset by a greater rise in the standard of living, where wages, the rise in wages have exceeded the rise in costs and so on. And there's a feeling that things are moving smoothly towards a greater degree of normality, and that in itself, of course, pleases everybody.
From your relatively sort of calm position, what would you think would be a good working majority? What's the minimum good working majority in the Commons?
Well, it's rather difficult for somebody who sits in the more remote atmosphere of the House of Lords to say. I should have thought that 50 would be perfectly adequate. Indeed, as you know, we've done on far less in the last 3 years.
And any prediction now, after watching the results, as to what it is likely to be?
I should hope it might be that at any rate.
Yeah, I think it does look as though it wouldn't be that much. Well, Lord Salisbury, thank you very much indeed for coming here and taking part in your first television broadcast.
Well, I've been very happy to come and give my views for what they're worth.
Thank you very much indeed. Now back to Richard Dimbleby in the studio.
And back at once to my other half here, David Butler, who has some hard information for us.
Well, it's the work of the slide rule experts on my left, and they've been trying to check whether the swing over the whole country, roughly 2%, a little under 2%, has varied. 2% swing from Labour to the Conservatives has varied much in different types of area. And in the seaside resorts that we've had, there has actually been a very slight swing to Labour. In the mining constituencies, there's been a swing to the Conservatives, but well under 1%, well below the average. In Scotland, too, it's been only about half of what it is in the average. And I think there's another result, so I'll stop on that one.
There is. It's the result from Epsom in Surrey. The retiring member was Mr. Malcolm McCorkadale, Conservative. Mr. Rawlinson, who succeeded him, has held the seat, as you see, for the Conservatives. The Conservative majority in 1951 was 19,749.
There was a swing there to the Conservatives of 2.75%, well above the average. Again, if I can trust this, I'm always a little suspicious when I get results which I know include votes from one of the statisticians, and this in the Epsom result does include the votes from the man who's actually been calculating the precise amount of swing. So I never know quite whether he's trying to overweight his own vote in some way or other. Not that I know how he voted, of course.
Any further comment on Epsom from anybody? David, would you like to continue what you were saying before we had the sudden result?
Yes, I was drawing attention to the variations in swing, whether it was greater or less in different types of constituency in different parts of the country. Well, in London, in the county of London, those 42 seats, we haven't had all of them in, but based on about 37 of them, about 31 unchanged ones, the swing is just over 1%. Again, only a little more than half what it has been over the country taken as a whole. Now, one particularly interesting thing is to find out what the effect of Liberal intervention has been. Some people say, do Liberals take votes from the Conservatives or from Labour? Well, I've been checking on that, and it does seem that in constituencies where a Liberal didn't fight in 51, but intervened this time, he did take votes from the Conservatives. That is to say, the swing against Labour was smaller in those seats where the Liberals intervened. Conversely, in those seats where the Liberals fought in 51 and didn't fight this time, the Liberal withdrawal seemed to help the Conservatives. So in this election, as in 1951, it does seem the Liberal vote, when a Liberal stands, is taken rather more from the Conservatives than from Labour, but it's certainly taken from both sides.
I observe that while Butler is talking, the total vote board is being made up. In a moment or two, I think we should be able to see what the new total is, and I think I shall spring it upon Bob or Teddy over there to make a comment upon it when the figure's ready. After that, we might perhaps, if you'd like to, have a dive out, if we can, and see what's going on up in that counting hall at Leeds, where we're still waiting for them to get to their result. There may be some time yet. Anyway, if we see the voting board in a moment, talk about that, I shall then be able to find out whether Leeds is ready to take us, or whether we'll find everybody with their backs turned when we get there. Party totals, meanwhile.
Very little new here, of course. On the whole, surprisingly few seats have changed hands when you consider there is this average swing to the Conservatives of 2%. We can expect rather more of a change of hands in seats today if the Conservatives are to build up the majority, which we're fairly confidently predicting they will, on the strength of the general trends. But it looks as if it's neck and neck on the right-hand column, but as we've said again and again, of course, Labour needs at this stage of the game to be not 1 seat ahead as they are, but probably 30 or 40 seats ahead if they were to win this election. And of course they're not that far ahead.
One point that strikes me, without having the figures in front of me, though I've managed to arrange with Butler, he's got them in front of him, is whether the timing of results coming in this morning, today, is showing any great change from 1951. As a layman, I was expecting to see something very much quicker.
Well, of course, they were much quicker last night. Oh, look, I think the party total votes are up, which will be interesting to see.
Go ahead and deal with them, yes.
There you see now we're getting up 15.5 million, not many things in this morning. The party proportions the same as when we last showed this board, 50% for the Conservatives, 47% for Labour. Actually the same as when we showed, I think, about 3 o'clock in the morning. And the 7 3/4 millions are getting on for votes for the Conservatives, and 7 and getting on for 7.5 millions for Labour. The Liberals still 300,000, with about half the results in from constituencies where Liberal candidates were standing. Just 100,000 votes for the others, and actually considerably less than 1% of the vote for them. But we didn't bother you with any fractions on that board. I think it's got enough on it for the ordinary 10-inch television screen as it is.
Now let's come back a moment from vote totals to this question of time, David.
Yes, well, it is interesting. Last night they went much faster than they did in 51, and we really planned our operation to some extent on the way they came in 51, and we did manage to keep our heads above water, but only just last night. Well, this morning, so far, they've been coming in more slowly. By this time, in 51, we got, I think, 4 results in. Reigate, one of the ones we've already had, oddly enough, and Lancaster. Lancaster came out just before 10:30 last time and came out about 10:30 this morning. And it was followed fairly closely by Reigate, which came out last time at about 10:45, and has come out about 11:15. Also by this time we'd got the result in from Billericay, but that was counted last night. Was counted last night. We're not on the second day as it was back in 51. Then the Epsom division of Surrey, yes, that we have had in. That's, of course, the third result we've had in this morning, and that, oddly enough, came in at almost exactly the same time to the minute as it came in this morning. But looking ahead, by 12 o'clock, 8 more results had come in 1951. Be interesting to see whether, in this respect, 1955 can beat 1951. Perhaps you'd call that progress.
Meanwhile, progress, apropos of progress, a result is on its way in. We'll just hold our horses for a second. It's not convenient, incidentally, for us to go over to Leeds just at the moment anyway, so that the best thing we can do is to get this more vital information, which we shall have with us very shortly, just coming up now. Nottingham West. Well, now here is a new seat which has been won by Mr. Tom O'Brien, who sat for 5 years here in its previous form, and for West Nottingham for 5 years before. Mr. O'Brien, let me say, is a well-known trade union official. He's the General Secretary of NAPKI, as it's called in the cinema industry, the National Association of Theatrical and Kine Employees, and a recent chairman, too, of the TUC. So Mr. Tom O'Brien has Nottingham West for Labour.
His majority is enormously down on last time when he stood in Nottingham North West, but there's been a considerable change. However, he is one of the most flamboyant characters, and I'd like to hear what Thompson has to say about Tom O'Brien.
Well, I mean, flamboyant does it, I think. He is Tom O'Brien is a very colourful figure, a very forthright controversialist who can't be relied upon to toe any line. He's done some very sensational things, but he's a very, on the whole, well-respected figure in the trade union movement, and has, of course, recently been chairman of the TUC. The other point I wanted to make was that this is the first Nottingham result, and I think, David, you'll agree that Nottingham is one of the most interesting of the redistributed areas.
It is indeed very interesting.
And
May I interrupt you? I'm sorry. Party totals are in, and you'll see for the first time we have a dead heat here.
Yes.
No doubt, Butler, you can explain whether that has any great significance.
I don't think it has any great significance. It's only confirming what we all along said was more or less bound to happen if this time's results resembled last time's. The Conservatives, as the county divisions came in, were bound to pull ahead. Labour hasn't had any results in so far this morning, except this last one, which I don't think may not be included in this total. The Conservatives have had 3 results in from county divisions, mainly in Surrey.
The Isle of Ely. Major Henry Legg Burke, Conservative, the sitting member, holds the Isle of Ely for the Conservatives. In 1951, the Conservative majority was 6,404.
A swing of just 0.5% to the Conservatives.
Here is Swansea East. Here, the sitting member, Mr. David Mort, who sat in the House for 17 years, holds the seat for Labour after a minor redistribution. I can't give you an earlier majority figure there.
It was a very small redistribution. The earlier majority, I think, was 21,000. His majority does seem to have gone down about 4,000. It was just a small change in ward boundaries in Swansea, I believe. There was a 72% poll there. That's to say, a 10% drop in the number of people going to the poll in Swansea East.
Another result is in from Kent. It's Faversham. Here in Faversham, there is a Conservative gain from where the sitting member, Mr. Percy Morris, who sat for 10 years, holds the seat for Labour. And now back to your point, if you like.
Well, Faversham. It's the first Conservative gain of the day.
There's urgent news from Leeds. We take you now straight from London to Leeds.
939. I declare Mr. Healy duly elected.
Leeds East was Dennis Healy's Socialist 26,083, Cyril Chapman Conservative 21,144, a Labour majority of 4,939. And so with that Labour victory in Leeds East, back to Richard Dimbleby in the studio.
We have another result here, in fact two more waiting now. Here is Sudbury and Woodbridge in Suffolk, where Mr. John Hare, Conservative, was the Vice Chairman of the Conservative Party, Lord Woolton's deputy, holds the seat for the Conservatives. The Conservative majority in 1951 was 5,952.
The Liberal forfeits her deposit.
And in Newark, Nottinghamshire, a major redistribution, and the sitting member, Mr. George Deere, holds the seat for Labour. He's been in the House for 20 years.
Some people thought redistribution would make the difference.
Party attendance.
Well, it's now gone up, the Conservative lead has now gone up about 50 to 52.
176, 173 results still to come on today. They haven't actually yet caught up with that change in Faversham on the scoreboard. We should have that doubtless next time we go to it.
Another result is in from Essex, Chigwell. This is a new seat, and it has been won by Mr. John Biggs Davison, the Conservative candidate, who fought South Coventry in 51.
Chigwell is partly made up of Woodford, Sir Winston Churchill's division, which has been redistributed.
And here is Murray and Nairn. The sitting member, Mr. James Stewart, Secretary of State for Scotland, Conservative whip who sat for 32 years, holds the seat for the Conservatives. The 1951 Conservative majority was 5,394.
0.5% swing to the Conservatives in Murray and Nairn.
Canterbury, Kent. In Canterbury, the sitting member, Mr. Leslie Thomas, Conservative, has sat for 2 years. He holds the seat for the Conservatives. In 1951, the Conservative majority was 14,089.
1.5% swing to the Conservatives.
He is the son, by the way, of the late Mr. J.H. Thomas. Another result in from Devonshire, this time it's Tiverton. And here, the sitting member, Mr. Heathcote Amory, who sat for 10 years, Minister of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food, and other ministerial jobs before that, holds a seat for the Conservatives. The 51 majority for Conservatives was 10,448.
A 1% swing to the Conservatives.
Down south, one from Northern Ireland now, Captain Lawrence Orr, Ulster Unionist, who sat for 5 years, holds the seat for the Ulster Unionists or for the Conservatives. There was a Sinn Féin candidate, as you see.
This isn't like North Down, where the Conservative got 97% of the vote and the Sinn Féin candidate only got 3%. The most fabulous straight fight result I've ever seen in any English election statistics of this century.
Now that brings us for one moment of taking breath up with the results, but here is another straight away. Salisbury, Wiltshire. The sitting member, Mr. John Morrison, who sat for 13 years, holds Salisbury for the Conservatives. The Conservative majority in 1951 was 5,412. The Liberal candidate keeps his deposit. Here is Peterborough, Northamptonshire. And in Peterborough, the sitting member, Mr. Harmer Nichols, holds a seat for the Conservatives. He sat for 5 years. He's the Parliamentary Secretary to the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food. This, I think, was a marginal seat.
After 2 majorities under. Oh, I'll leave that.
Yes, here is Essex South East, a new seat which has been won by Mr. Bernard Brain, Conservative, who sat for Billericay for 5 years before this. Another result from Essex. It is Malden, Essex. Here, Mr. Harrison, here there is a Conservative gain from Labour. The retiring member was Mr. Tom Dryburgh, a well-known Labour member. Mr. Linton Scutts succeeded him and has been defeated by Mr. Harrison, Conservative. The Labour majority in 1951 was a small one, 704.
1.5% swing to the Conservatives made that difference in Malden.
And here is the Isle of Wight. In the Isle of Wight, Sir Peter MacDonald, a well-known Conservative member who sat for 31 years, holds the Isle of Wight for the Conservatives. The 1951 Conservative majority in the island was 12,789. After the Isle of Wight, we come to Stafford and Stone, county constituency of Staffordshire. The son of Lord Lovat, Hugh Fraser, the Conservative member, was sat for 10 years in the House, holds this for the Conservatives. There was a majority in 1951 for the Conservatives of 6,046.
A swing to the Conservatives of almost 3.5% in Stafford and Stone to Mr. Hugh Fraser.
Now, although there's a momentary pause, I know that other results are shortly to be on the way.
This is what we call the spate.
The spate, you're right. Would anybody like to take 10 seconds? Mackenzie.
Well, just on Malden, of course, it was one of the most hotly contested constituencies in the whole area of East Anglia. Much interest in it, held formerly by Tom Dryburgh, who had a great personal following, now been lost by Labour.
Here is Hertfordshire East, where the Conservative sitting candidate, Mr. Derek Walker-Smith, chairman of the Conservative Backbenchers Committee, the 1922 committee, holds the seat for the Conservatives. It's a new seat, this. And straight on, I'm afraid, no comment there, Mackenzie, much as you'd like to, Caerphilly, Glamorgan, where the sitting member, Mr. Ness Edwards, was Postmaster General and Parliamentary Secretary to the Ministry of Labour and National Service, holds the seat for Labour. In 1951, the Labour majority was 21,482.
There must be something wrong with those figures. I just warn people we may have to...
Yes, those figures don't tally with... All right, we'll wait and see on Caerphilly. We'll move on straight away anyway to Chorley in Lancashire. Chorley, Lancashire, the sitting member, glad it's back, the sitting member, Mr. Clifford Kenyon, Labour, holds the seat for Labour. There was a 1951 Labour majority of 583.
This was a marginal seat some people thought would change hands. Labour's firmly in.
Now we have urgent news from Leeds. We take you once again from London over to Leeds.
And here's Sir James Croysdale, the Lord Mayor of Leeds, with the final Leeds result, Leeds West. It's panel Labour, highly Conservative, Hudson Liberal. So, panel is Labour, highly Conservative,
Leeds
Hudson
West.
Liberal.
Mr. Thomas Charles Panel, 24,576. For Alderman Joseph Hiley, 18,312. Mr. Harold Hudson, 3,699. I declare Mr. Panel duly elected.
And so the Labour Party has won 4 of the 6 seats, and as Mr. Panel makes his address to the large crowd, we say goodbye to you from Leeds and return you once again to Richard Dimbleby in the studio.
Now the results in the studio. This is Harborough in Leicestershire. A major redistribution here. Sitting member, Mr. John Baldock, Conservative, holds the seat for the Conservatives.
The Liberal improves his position on last time and saves his deposit by a fairly narrow margin this time.
In Uxbridge, Middlesex, a marginal seat, the Labour and Cooperative sitting member, Mr. Frank Beswick, continues to hold the seat for Labour. A 1951 Labour and Co-op majority of 1,548.
Here was a marginal seat that might well have changed hands. It hasn't. And this may affect people's estimates of the final majority.
Here is Bedfordshire Mid. A minor redistribution. The sitting member, Mr. Alan Lennox Boyd, Secretary of State to the Colonial Office and formerly Minister of Transport and Civil Aviation, holds a seat for the Conservatives. There's urgent news now from Glasgow. We will go straight away from London over to Glasgow. Yes? I'm sorry, I'm wrong. We stay on the results and we don't go to Glasgow, so we'll turn out the red light up there. Surrey East. Mr. Charles Doughty, Conservative, sitting member, barrister, has held the seat for 4 years, holds it against his opponent, also a barrister. 1951 Conservative majority was 23,910.
A 1.9% swing, almost 2% swing for the Conservatives in East Surrey.
Here is Lanarkshire North. Lanarkshire North, the sitting member, Miss Margaret Herbison, a leading woman member of the Labour Party, a broadcaster too, who sat for 10 years and was Joint Under-Secretary of State for Scotland, holds the seat for Labour. There was a 1951 Labour majority of 6,304.
Hardly any change in the proportion since 1951.
We move straight on to Stirlingshire West. In Stirlingshire West, where there was a minor redistribution, the sitting member Labour, Mr Alfred Balfour, sat for 10 years. He holds the seat for Labour. Here is another Scottish result, Perth and East Perthshire. And here, the sitting member, Colonel Alan Gom Duncan, Conservative, who sat altogether in the House for 10 years, holds the seat for the Conservatives.
The Scottish Nationalist did better than the Labour Party one. That's extremely interesting there. He comfortably saved his deposit.
Stoke-on-Trent Central. The sitting member, Dr. Barnett Stross, Labour, sat for 10 years in the House after minor redistribution, keeps the seat for Labour. We now have the party totals.
Yes, well, the Conservative lead has now gone up again to 54.
We move straight on now to the next result, which is waiting, Stoke-on-Trent North. Stoke-on-Trent North, minor redistribution. Mrs. Harriet Slater, the Labour and Cooperative sitting member, holds the seat for Labour. Here is Leeds East. In Leeds East, a new seat, Mr. Dennis Healy, a backbench Labour expert on foreign affairs, has the seat for Labour. He was formerly sat for Leeds South East for 3 years.
We had that announced on sound already.
So we did. That's a check result, yes. Here is Stoke-on-Trent South. A minor redistribution here, and the sitting member, Mr. Ellis Smith, Parliamentary Secretary of the Board of Trade at one time, holds the seat for Labour. There'll be another result, I think, here in one moment. So we will just stand by and wait for it for a second. Kenzie, do you want to fill in with that, what you were going to say? Or not?
Well, many results ago, I wanted to comment on the re-election of Derek Walker-Smith. You referred to him as chairman of the 1922 committee, and that tends to be a rather mysterious body to most people, with an odd title. Actually, it's the body which represents the entire group of conservative backbenchers. It's the equivalent to the Parliamentary Labour Party, minus the front bench, minus the cabinet ministers on the Conservative side.
Thank you very much. Sorry, the explanation is brief. There's urgent news from Glasgow now. We take you from London straight over to Glasgow.
And there is the Sheriff Principal of Glasgow, Sir Robert
Ladies and gentlemen, I have to declare the result of the election in Rutherglen. Mr. Richard Charles Brooman White, 19,141. Mr. Gilbert McAllister, 17,040. Majority 2,101. I therefore declare Mr. Brooman White the member for Rutherglen.
Well, the Unionists therefore retain the Rutherglen seat. And I hand you now back to Richard Dimbleby in the studio.
Northants South Northamptonshire, in other words. The sitting member here is Sir Reginald Manningham Buller, Attorney General, who was Solicitor General before. He holds the seat for the Conservatives. For many people I know, excitement is now mounting very strongly.
Well, that shows a Conservative lead of 75 over Labour.
85 seats still to come, 9 seats for a clear majority for the Conservatives.
Here is Louth in Lincolnshire. The sitting member, Mr. Cyril Osborne, Conservative, holds the seat. He sat for 10 years here. 1951 Conservative majority was 5,768. Immediately behind it comes, I can never pronounce this. Abertillery, thank you. I always want to say Abertillery. In Monmouthshire. Here the sitting member is the Reverend Llewellyn Williams. He holds the seat for Labour. The 1951 Labour majority was 24,917.
The Conservative only just saves his deposit in Abertillery, if I am right on that.
You are, I think, yes. Ayrshire South. Ayrshire South from Scotland. The sitting member is Mr. Emrys Hughes, a well-known and very lively debater in the House of Commons who holds this seat for Labour. The 1951 Labour majority was 7,836.
Swing of 1% to Labour in South Ayrshire.
Straight on to Kettering in Northamptonshire. The sitting member here, Mr. Gilbert Mitchison, Labour, sat for 10 years, holds the seat for Labour. The 1951 Labour majority was 6,827.
Swing of 1% to the Conservatives in Kettering.
Here comes a Scottish result. It's Stirlingshire, East and Clackmannan, where the sitting member is Mr. Arthur Woodburn, a most respected Labour member and a leading Scottish personality in the House, who sat here for 16 years, was once the Secretary of State for Scotland. The Labour majority here, he keeps the seat for Labour, of course, was in 1951 was 7,504.
And each got exactly the same share of the poll as they got in 1951.
I think at any moment we should have another look at our party totals. We must keep a close watch on them now because the figure is mounting towards the necessary ultimate total. And thereafter, should the total go the way in which our experts believe it will, we shall be watching for majority figures. The situation in the House of Commons, Teddy, we might look at that now, I think.
Yes, well, there it is, creeping along as we've expected it to do. It reflects the latest figures we've just been looking at, really. I don't think there's very much more one can elaborate on at the moment except to point to the diminishing gap there in the corner of the white Conservative side, every square representing 5 seats, and to wonder exactly how soon it'll be before that fills up, as it clearly must now.
Now we wait as a momentary pause now before we come to further results. There you have the situation in the House of Commons.
It might be just interesting if I were to interject there, if there's a split second to do it in. Somebody mentioned the position of the Speaker. There is rather an interesting point there, which may not be generally known, that the Speaker of the House of Commons, of course, like all other members of the House of Commons, ceases to be an MP at the dissolution. Dissolves Parliament, all the members' seats are voided automatically, including that of the Speaker. But he does not cease to be Speaker of the House of Commons. He retains certain functions which can confer upon him the special status, even although he's no longer an MP.
It's another result cruising along on its way towards us, I think, which we will wait for. Of course. Meanwhile, here it comes. It is from Wiltshire. It's Chippenham. Here, the sitting member is Sir David Eccles, Minister of Education and then Minister of Works, who holds the seat which he's occupied now for 12 years for the Conservatives. The 1951 Conservative majority was 4,878.
The Liberal saves his deposit there by a relatively narrow margin, and there's a swing of 2.25% to the Conservatives, to Sir David Eccles, compared to the result last time. He must be getting very near to that critical 315th seat, yes, which denotes a clear Conservative majority in this election.
Another result is in. It's from Lichfield and Tamworth, Staffordshire. A major redistribution here. The sitting member, Mr. Julian Snow, a government whip and Vice-Chamberlain of the Household, holds the seat for Labour.
Defeating Mr. Blow by a margin bigger than last time.
Immediately behind it comes Ashford in Kent. The sitting member, William Deeds, Parliamentary Secretary, a junior minister, Parliamentary Secretary to the Ministry of Housing and Local Government for Ashford, Kent, holds the seat for the Conservatives. The 1951 Conservative majority here was 7,448.
Slightly above average swing to the Conservatives, I believe, there.
Nearly time to watch our party totals again, do you think,
I hope
David?
So, yes.
Well, we'll take... Oh, here they are.
Well, you see, here we go. That represents, 75, doesn't it? A lead of 75. The lead hasn't altered since the last showing. It's been fluctuating very narrowly about 75 for half an hour.
While that party total board remains there for a moment, David, would you make it clear for everybody to establish a lead and a government, the figure which is now increasing has to reach 315.
Yes, a clear majority is 315. If we exclude the Speaker, then there are 629 seats in the House. 315 is just one more than half of that. Here we see the figures going up very interestingly, and now we've got whatever it is. Right?
There's a result.
Lag. Here's a new result.
There is indeed. Coming from Suffolk, an important result from Lowestoft. In Lowestoft, the sitting member, Mr. Edward Evans, Labour, who sat for 10 years, holds the seat for Labour. The 1951 Labour majority was very small here, 847.
Yes, this was the last of the seats I drew your attention to about half an hour ago as a marginal seat that would be coming up and worth watching. I haven't on my list any unchanged marginal seats which seem very likely to change hands in the results to come.
Another result is here now. Hull North, Kingston upon Hull North, full title, a major redistribution here. The sitting member, Mr. Austin Hudson, Conservative, who sat for 5 years, has held this seat for the Conservatives.
And many people thought this seat would be lost to the Conservatives because of redistribution. There was a 78% poll there. Mr. Hudson and Mr. Ford, who fought each other in 51, have fought again on a more favourable ground for Mr. Ford, but it wasn't quite favourable enough, and Mr. Ford is out by a majority of 590.
I think we'll just sit tight on these results now, even if we wait. This is an exciting moment, and we mustn't miss it. Here comes another result. It's from the far north, from Gateshead, Gateshead East, where there was a major redistribution. Mr. Arthur Moody, a Labour candidate who sat in the House for 10 years, has held this seat for Labour. This is the south bank of the Tyne, opposite Newcastle, of course.
That's the seat Mr. Ziliakis sat for once.
Here's a result from Meriden, which incidentally you know is the very centre, the very heart of England, from Meriden, Warwickshire. A new seat which has been won by Mr. Moss for Labour.
This was one of the new seats which was really marginal. Many people thought that it would go Conservative, but Labour holds it by an adequate majority.
I think there's a result now on its way from across the border again, which we will hold on for. Here it comes. It is from Midlothian, a new seat again, which has been won for Labour by Mr. David Pride. He was formerly a minor, Mr. Pride.
I've done some very interesting calculations here, which I think are really very important. Of the seats still to come, it's not possible because of redistribution to say exactly, but it does seem that they're about even between the parties. That is to say, if there's not much swing in those seats, then the parties won't change their majority relative to each other much on the 90-odd results we've still got to come in. So perhaps we are seeing something pretty near to the final majority on the present scoreboard when we next go to it.